Under the blood-red glow of Araxis's sky, Ember Kane slipped through the shattered gates of the Eastern District, her cloak of woven starlight whispering against the ash-laden cobbles. Rumors had spread like wildfire that the ex-legionnaire turned rebel would dare this heist, stealing the Constellation shards themselves from the Imperial Sky Fortress, but never had anyone believed she would succeed. Each footfall carried the weight of 1,000 silent oaths, promises to the oppressed citizens who huddled in candlelit cellars, dreaming of freedom. Ember paused under a broken lamppost, letting her sapphire eyes drink in the quake of arcane energy rippling through the city gates. Tonight the stars would be her weapons. Scaling the embattled wall of the south ramparts, Ember's boots, stitched with silver thread and warded against detection, found purchase on crumbled masonry. Flames from the burning quarter cast frantic shadows across her features, illuminating the scar that curved from her temple to her cheek, a souvenir from the battle that exiled her from the Legion. She touched it almost reverently, feeling both pain and purpose flood her veins. Above, the fortress drifted on storm clouds, its black hull etched with runes of oppression that throbbed with unnatural light. Ember's jaw set. She would sever those runes tonight. Arriving atop the rooftop highways, skeletal bridges of dark steel spanning the city like interlaced ribs, she paused to survey her path. Patrol drones hummed along magnetic rails, their crystalline lenses sweeping the horizon. Drawing a shimmering shard from her belt, Ember unleashed a pulse of anti-light, warping their sensors and leaving only static in their wake. Her cloaks, threads flared in approval, manifesting constellations that danced across the highway's girders. She exhaled, steeled herself, and stepped onto the magnetic rail itself, riding the current toward destiny. Beneath her, Araxis's spires glowed. Like molten candles, each window a flicker of hope or terror. She recalled her days in the Legion, marched in perfect formation, surrendered her will to a heartless cause, and despised the memory. The rebellion had given her back her soul. Now, slipping through the fortress's outer hull, she probed its armored plating until sensing the maintenance hatch's control runes. Whispering a binding incantation learned in secret midnight lessons, she severed the wards and eased the hatch open without a sound. Inside, crystalline conduits pulsed. With captured starlight, each tube a cage for a constellation shard, living fragments of the sky itself. Ember's pulse quickened at the sight. Sapphire orbs swirling with nebula clouds, prisms of amethyst dreams, crescents of molten gold. The stars she'd once watched from distant world ships now lay within arm's reach, but only if she proved worthy. She pressed her blade to the conduit's protective grid, chanting silverwork runes that dissolved its protections. With a soft pop, the conduit's hum ceased, and Ember knew there was no turning back. Ahead, 2 sentinel legionnaires, clad in halo-forged plate let no one pass. Ember stepped into their crossfire with the grace of a starfall, her blade aflame with meteoric iron magic. She weaved among their halberds, scattering ghost shadows that coiled around their limbs and drew them from the light. With each precise strike, she liberated yet another shard, pressing it to her mask's lattice so the runes bound it until it found a new home. The vault door, an adamantine monolith carved with iron runes, stood before her, bearing the Empire's heart to interrogation. Applying the stolen star chart to the door's seal, Ember unfurled the map's living runes across the cold metal. They sang in reply, unlocking with a thunderous groan that echoed through the fortress's bones. Inside lay the heart of oppression, rows of crystalline alcoves housing the full constellation cluster, each shard humming with cosmic memory. Ember allowed herself a smile as she worked methodically, sliding shard after shard into her reinforced satchel. Their combined resonance filled her veins with cosmic power, reminding her why she had risked everything. The alarms shattered the silence. Ember's breath came in ragged bursts as red warning fires flared along the corridors. She barred the vault behind her with an improvised seal of rune fire and dashed into the labyrinthine underdecks. The stolen shards pulsed, warping the fortress's wards in her favor. Doors that once required clearance now flew open, corridors twisted to hide her passage, and the sentinel drones lost all meaning in her wake. Legionnaires in enviro armor surged into the corridor, bolstered by the regime's own wards. Ember let the shards guide her blade, each swing sending arcs of starlight that fragmented enemy shields and fractured ward plates. Her cloak billowed with each movement, weaving illusions of multiple selves that sowed confusion in the ranks. The fortress trembled under the strain. Walls rippled like liquid metal. Overhead conduits sang a discordant chorus. Breaking onto an external service roadway, Ember paused only to hurl a runic charge backward. A hail of fire shattered the corridor. Behind her, blocking pursuit, she vaulted over blackened steam vents, felt the chill of high-altitude winds, and plunged into the void with wings of living shadow. Each stolen shard burned a trail of aurora light as she descended through the storm-swept sky toward the rebel enclave below. The glassy cliffs rose from the city's edge like the spine of a leviathan, their sheer faces bathed in phosphorescent, lichen and ghost lantern glow. Rebel sentries glimpsed her descent and raised the horns of dawn. In moments, she touched down on the cliff's precipice, shards humming in resonance with the hidden lanterns. Below, the starbound Concord gathered, mages in midnight robes, ex-legionnaires polishing blades, artisans clutching star beads of hope. Ember unloaded the satchel's bounty onto a weathered stone table, each shard's glow painting determined faces in shifting colors. The council gathered close, Viren the Spellwright, Captain Cale Voss, and elders whose silver hair told decades of hidden resistance. Ember traced her finger over the map's final runes, revealing the Sky Fortress's weaknesses. Hidden docking, seals, maintenance conduits, and the exact moment the Constellation energy peaked, when the shards were most vulnerable. Plans formed like constellations in their minds. Simultaneous strikes would sever the fortress's supply lines, mages would collapse the arcane girders, and they would storm the docks to reclaim the remaining shards. Ember's voice rang with fervor. Tonight, we free the heavens and strike. A blow that will shatter the Empire's lies. Her words ignited the rebels' hearts. Their cheers echoed off the cliff face and into the storm below. As dawn approached, Ember stood alone on the cliff's edge, the stolen shards woven into her cloak now pulsing like a living night sky. Lightning crackled across the horizon, illuminating Araxis's spires in brief, violent flickers. In her hand, she clasped the star chart that had guided her this far. The cost had been everything she had once loved, but the price of freedom was always steep. She closed her eyes, felt the weight of her promise, and whispered, "Let the world burn bright again." Behind her, the rebels marched into the dawn-lit streets, ready to fan the sparks she had struck into a roaring flame. Ember turned, cloak, dancing in celestial hues, and followed them, determined to lead the charge that would set the sky and the world ablaze with revolution. Beneath the dying light of dawn, Ember Kane and the starbound Concord's advance guard slipped through, Araxis's twisting sewer tunnels, each step stirring motes of bioluminescent mushrooms that flickered like warning beacons. The stench of rot and stale water pressed in on them, but Ember's resolve turned every foul gust into a clarion call. Above, the freshly liberated constellation shards pulsed softly against her chest, their stolen magic guiding her through the dark labyrinth. Every twist and turn of the tunnel revealed ancient glyphs, scrawled in faded star ink, warnings from lost civilizations about the price of wielding skyfire. Ember pressed onward, heedless of superstition, ready to ignite. The first spark of revolution in the city's heart. Emerging into the catacombs beneath the imperial quarter, the rebel forces found themselves before a seam of forgotten cathedrals, vaulted chambers carved from volcanic glass and choked with centuries of dust. Here the regime had once executed heretics, imprisoning them in cells where shadows themselves whispered promises of oblivion. Ember paused at a grated doorway, tracing the runes of binding on her palm before touching them to the bars. They flared with violet light and dissolved into incense smoke. She stepped through, leading the bewildered legionnaires of the conquered, into this desecrated sanctum to reclaim its power for their cause. At the cathedral's central dais, Ember raised a sapphire shard and let its light fill the chamber. The stained glass windows, cracked long before by imperial onslaughts, came alive in rainbow brilliance as the shard's resonance swept through their lead lattices. Rebel mages set to work chanting ancient choral spells, weaving binding circles that repurposed the cathedral's old wards from instruments of fear into beacons of unity. Ember watched the transformation with fierce pride, knowing that by sunrise, the city above would feel the pulse of liberated stars echoing through its underbelly. Word of this first act of defiance rippled through Araxis like wildfire. By midday, hidden networks of couriers and street folk had spread the news. The Concord held the Undercity, and the shards had been reclaimed. Ember and her lieutenants climbed through secret exits into the merchant districts, where stalls of exotic spices and enchanted trinkets catered to both imperial functionaries and commoners alike. Here, Ember paused to address the traders, distributing shards of broken shard lights to light every lantern. "Tonight," she proclaimed, "the sky will burn for us all." Murmurs of wonder and relief swept through the market, the first embers of mass uprising igniting in every alley. As dusk approached, Ember stood atop a shattered statue of the old emperor, overlooking the city's ring of fortified walls. She watched as pockets of rebels, farmers, artisans, former legionnaires, seized guard posts and barricaded checkpoints. Shards embedded in the gates glowed with the stolen light, repelling imperial wards. At her side, Commander Kyle Voss coordinated. Squads of sharpshooters and skirmishers, their crossbows and arc pistols disarming patrols with non-lethal precision. Ember felt a surge of hope. The first great act of insurrection was unfolding, and the Constellations' stolen fire was the spark. Through the night, Ember led a strike team into the heart of the Imperial Quarter, where the Sky Fortress's supply conduits descended into the city. They moved in silence, disabling the anti-air batteries and collapsing hover lanes with carefully placed charges of stardust powder. Each blast reverberated through the arc latticework above like rolling thunder, cutting off the fortress's ability to summon reinforcements. Rebel signals, flare shards shot into the sky, marked each successful sabotage, painting the heavens in promise. Imperial alarm bells rang out across Araxis as the barracks erupted in revolt. Enduring the chaos, Ember and her vanguard stormed the central armory, where guards dressed in gold-trimmed cerulean armor defended caches of arc weapons. Ember wove starlight into her blade until it shimmered like a living constellation, then cleaved through the armory doors in a single stroke. The ensuing clash of steel and wards echoed through the corridors, but the stolen shard's resonant harmony bolstered the rebels, driving the Imperial soldiers back in disarray. With the armory secured, Ember paused only to don the golden breastplate, once worn by the fallen hero Marius Lightbringer, now emblazoned with the Concord's emblem of a shattered star. Adopting the mantle of leadership, she strode forward to rally the rebels for the final push, a march to the Sky Fortress's groundhold. Beneath the flickering glow of rebel torches, she addressed the swelling ranks. Her voice rang clear. "Tonight, we reclaim the heavens from tyranny. Tonight, we become the constellation of our own destiny." The march through Auraxis's grand avenues transformed the city into a storm of defiance. Buildings once adorned with imperial banners now dripped with the Concord's sigils, relief paintings of uplifted stars and unbroken people. Citizens flooded the streets, offering water, munitions, and prayers to the rebel host. Ember paused to embrace an old friend, a blacksmith who had forged her first moonblade, and pressed a shard into his palm. "Light the fire," she whispered. His nod sparked fresh fervor as he raced forward to fuel the rebellion's fervent flame. Dawn broke on the city's outer walls as the Concord's forces converged on the Sky Fortress's ground gates. Ember and Kale led the vanguard, breaching the barriers with explosive stardust charges that carved luminous scars through the fortified gates. The clash was monumental. Imperial legions emerged in disciplined ranks, their polished armor reflecting the shard's light. Ember leapt into the fray, her blade painting arcs of astral flame that cleaved through iron. Kale's command anthem, a low, thrumming invocation of unity, bolstered every rebel's courage, binding their spirits like the shards that now guided their wills. Arcane artillery roared to life within the fortress courtyards, plummeting bolts of charged light. Rebel mages countered with orb-casting spells, hurling spheres of starfire that detonated in silent supernovas. Ember soared above, the chaos on wings of starlight, directing reinforcements to weak points and sealing breaches with shimmering wards. Each action was choreographed in perfect harmony, the stolen constellations' resonance weaving unity through chaos. After hours of relentless combat, the rebel banner, stitched with recovered shards, flew atop the fortress's central rampart. Imperial soldiers, their will broken by the Constellations' reclaimed power, laid down arms. Ember descended to the courtyard floor, her silver hair glowing in dawn's pale light, and offered a hand to the last vexed captain of the guard. "Join us," she implored. "Together we reclaim our sky." The captain hesitated, then accepted, his armor-clad hand trembling as he rose to his feet in solidarity. As the city's bells tolled in victory, Ember guided the shattered shards into the fortress's heart, a grand orrery chamber where the constellations themselves could be reborn. Rebel mages formed a circle, weaving threads of song and starfire to reseal the shards into a living sky. Ember stood at the center, her voice humming the weaver's hymn that bound the cosmos to her will. One by one, the shards blossomed into constellations overhead, their patterns dancing against the vault of dawn as if the sky itself cheered the rebel triumph. With the Sky Fortress secure, Ember Caney and Commander Kale Voss stood upon its highest spire, gazing over Auraxis at the broken walls and rising hopes below. "We have stolen the constellations," Ember murmured, her eyes shining with starlight, "and returned them to the people." Kyle placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Now the sky belongs to all," he replied. Together they raised the banner of the Concord, its shards blazing like beacons showing the world that tyranny would never again eclipse the light of freedom. As the rebel restoration began, Ember Kane led the reclamation of Auraxis's ancient archivist's sanctum, a labyrinth of vaulted libraries where the Empire had buried forbidden star lore. Each tome they unearthed crackled with arcane potential, promising guidance for rebuilding magic as a force of life rather than control. Here, Ember convened scholars and mages to catalog every recovered shard's memory, weaving them into a grand tapestry of the newly liberated cosmos. Under Ember's direction, artisans forged the Constellation Pinnacle in the city's newly named Freedom Plaza, a towering spire of moonsteel and starlight crystal. Each recovered shard was embedded into its facets, creating a living monument that pulsed with gentle luminescence day and night. Crowds gathered to witness the unveiling, their collective breath rising in hush as Ember and Kale activated the Pinnacle's core with a duet of Weaver's song and Commander's pledge, binding the shard's light into a beacon of hope. Yet, beyond the city's revival, threats lingered at the borders. Phantom rifts, echoes of the Empire's earlier experimentation with void magic, punctured distant outposts, unleashing creatures born of darkness. Ember assembled a strike force. Aboard the Sky Fortress's restored winged skiffs, seasoned legionnaires turned rebels who trusted in her leadership. Their course charted for the shattered Isle of Noxhaven, they carried both arcane wards and the Constellations fragments to seal the rifts once and for all. Crossing the crimson expanse, Ember stood at the skiff's prow, wind-tugging starlight. Threads from her cloak as she watched auroras swirl beneath them. Kale by her side held a sphere containing the last unreleased shard, its amethyst glow swirling with the lament song of lost worlds. Ember's gaze steeled. They would not fail where the Empire had succumbed to fear. Below, the isles blackened. Spires pierced storm-laden clouds, rifts roaring like hungry beasts. They descended into Noxhaven's caldera, where lava lakes glowed like molten rubies and skyfire danced with ash. There, vast fissures belched void shadow, spilling phantasmal fiends that skittered across obsidian plains. Ember led the assault, her blade carving arcs of star-white light that banished the shadow spawn. Kale's wards flared in response, sealing fissures with purified constellation energy. Local rebels, harvesters once forced into slavery, joined the fray, their hearts lifted by Ember's presence. After hours of desperate battle, they reached the central rift, a yawning maw of living night surrounded by statues of stone-winged, sentinels corrupted by void-imbued metal. Ember pressed the final shard to the fissure's edge and intoned the Weaver's Requiem, a melody threaded with memories of every rebellion, sacrifice, and dream of freedom. The shard's light flared, tearing through the void's shroud and stitching the rift closed in a blinding flash that echoed across the island. With peace secured, Ember and Kale returned to Auraxis, their victories heralded by newfound constellations. In the sky, patterns never before seen, each telling the tale of a reclaimed shard. They held a solemn memorial for those lost in the uprising, the legionnaires who chose conscience over command, the scholars who sacrificed secrets, and the citizens who dared to hope. Ember laid a single shard in the memorial's center, its gentle glow a promise that the fallen stars would never be forgotten. In the weeks that followed, the starbound Concord established the Celestial Council, a governing body that vowed to use magic in service of all. Ember took her seat alongside Kyle, representing the Weaver's oath, that no power would ever again be hoarded by a few. Under their guidance, the Council enacted edicts restoring the balance between light and shadow, ensuring the constellation shards fueled life, art, and communal prosperity. On the first anniversary of the heist, Ember climbed the Freedom Plaza's pinnacle alone at midnight. Constellations shimmered around her, constellations of rebel sigils and star-born promises. She unfurled her cloak, letting it billow in the celestial winds, and witnessed the city below glow in the shards borrowed. Starlight. Kale joined her at the summit, placing his hand over hers. "We have set the world aflame," he said softly. "But it is a fire that warms, rather than destroys." Ember nodded, tears of starlight glinting at her eyes. "And so it will burn for all time." Beneath their watchful gaze, Auraxis thrived. Skyfolk rode on glimmers of stardust, farmers harnessed lunar tides for verdant harvests, and children learned the Weaver's hymn alongside the Commander's pledge. Where once fear had bound the city in darkness, now unity shone in every window, and echo of laughter. Ember Caney and Kale Voss, Starweaver and Commander, stood at the helm of this new constellation of hope. their legacy written not in conquest, but in the shared light they had stolen back from the void.